Hello, and welcome to Tuesday's Briefings, a public affairs series for today's youth brought to you live from the Marlin Fitzwater Center for Communications at Franklin Pierce University in Range, New Hampshire. Our host today is Senior Melissa Stewart, who is an English major and is studying for her Women in Leadership certificate. Alumni Genevieve McGillicuddy also studied English when she was an undergraduate at Franklin Pierce University. She has transformed her passion for film into a career that now sees her in a leadership role at Turner Classic Movies as Vice President of Brand Activations and Partnerships. Please join me in welcoming today's guest, Genevieve McGillicuddy.
Thank you, Isaiah, and thank you to our studio audience for being here to talk about a subject I'm passionate about, and that's really important right now, women in leadership. And Genevieve, welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks.
Before I turn the mic over to you, I want to assure the audience that there's going to be time for questions at the end of today's briefing. So, all yours.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for hosting this. The topic of women in leadership is something that I've definitely thought about over the years and considered in terms of how I've developed my career. And I think what I wanted to share today are just a few observations that have really helped me as I've considered how to continue to grow into more of a leadership role in my company, but also in my community as well. I do a lot of volunteer work with film organizations in Atlanta, in addition to the work that I do at Turner Classic Movies. And I've been at TCM for 14 years. I've moved from a senior manager position into being a vice president at the company. And I've also been very fortunate to had a lot of guidance and mentors from women at Turner. That's something that's very important internally at Turner Broadcasting. It was definitely an appealing thing to me as I continued my career there. And the observations that I'd love to share just to kick off the conversation, these are things that I wish I had known when I had been a senior here at Pierce and kind of thinking about where I would go with my career. I think that the first thing to acknowledge, and it seems very simple but it's not, is that you should really communicate in whatever way you think appropriate to people around you what you're interested in doing. If you are clear about that and communicating about it, that puts forth in the minds of others, this is what you're interested in, and maybe I have a suggestion or an idea or connection point that can help you get there. So I think it's important to advocate for yourself in that way, to talk about where you'd like to go. And that may not be a direct line, and there may be other steps involved with getting there. But if you have those conversations, and they don't need to be formal, and tell people what you're interested in doing, you'd be surprised how far along that can get you on your path in getting that support. And on that note, I think what's really important is to realize that that is not self-promotion of a kind that seems egotistical or inappropriate. And I think especially women are a little bit more on the modest side. They believe I will do the work, it'll be great. Someone's going to recognize that and they will ask me to step up, or they're going to give me this. And that's just not simply the case. I think it's important to market yourself and talk about what your accomplishments are. And it's not boasting, it's communicating what you can do and what you're interested in doing. And that's really important. I actually got that lesson from a boss that I had, a man, who one day asked me a project I was working on. It was completed. It was a book that was being published, and I gave him a copy. And he said, I would love for you to deliver a copy to my boss. And I dropped by that person's office. They weren't in, but their assistant was. And I knew her, and I said, hey, I've got a copy of the book here for Steve. Can I leave this with you? And I did that. And then the next day, my boss said, did you deliver that book? And I said, yeah, he wasn't in his office, but I left it with his assistant, and I thought that was good enough. And he said, that was an opportunity for you to tell that person what you had accomplished and hand it to them. Don't miss out on that again. And that was a big learning for me. It's not about self-promotion. It's about communicating, I've completed this. This is what I've done. I'd like to tell you about it. And that's appreciated no matter where you're at. And on that note, I think it's also important, again, advocacy, self-advocacy, but also thinking about the people working around you. I've been very fortunate to report to some terrific bosses, both male and female. Specifically, my current boss is a woman. She's actually the first general manager of our network. And she has been explicit about providing opportunities that she availed herself of in the past for members of her team, and especially the female members of her team. And interestingly, as I took on this leadership role as a vice president at TCM in the last couple of years, under her, most of our leadership team is actually female now. And we don't take that for granted. I've been in meetings with her where I remember one time the two vice presidents, who are male and part of our team of 6 or 7 people, were absent because of various meetings. And she said, okay, I think it's just us ladies. And I thought, this is kind of a rare instance, especially in an entertainment company, even today. And it's really interesting in a world where you really don't see parity as often as you should. And suddenly it's kind of swung in the other direction. So that's been an interesting experience. But to go back to advocacy, she has been terrific about giving not only myself but other women on the team opportunities to talk to other people in senior leadership, to discuss their projects, and to give credit where credit is due. And she took an incredible leadership course for women in cable and telecommunications several years ago, and had a great experience. And then she turned around and offered me that opportunity to do that. So I think it's about, as a woman, I definitely feel a responsibility to pass on those opportunities to other women around me and people just in my department. And I think, you know, the company also makes a difference. There are many companies out there that don't do much in the way of supporting women in leadership roles. I think that is definitely changing, especially in the light of a lot of things going on recently. And we'll see if that's sustained. You know, I think a year from now it'll be interesting to see how many of these companies are actually not just paying lip service, but are giving women opportunities to move into that role. And I think the other thing that I would say is to always look for opportunities. And I think that one thing that I've observed, and when I did a leadership training session several years ago with other people working at my level, if you're working at a certain executive level, you're juggling lots of responsibilities, both personal and professional, and you're working at a certain capacity. And I think there's a famous quote out there, like, if you want to get something done, give it to the person who's already got 500 other things on their list. And I think women are often masters at multitasking, and we just keep on taking on more and more and more. True. And I think we also push aside on our priority list things that are important for ourselves. We're thinking about other people and how we serve them. And I think that it's very easy to say, I am just too busy, I have so much on my plate, I don't have time to go have lunch with that person that I want to network with, I'll do that next week. I will cancel this item on my list because I've got to get this project done. And there are opportunities that you can create in terms of connecting with other people and building your career and just in general getting knowledge that you need. And it is way too busy to spend your entire day, it's way too easy to spend your entire day in meetings and checking things off your list. And I think it's important to also put yourself on the list in terms of your career development, and that's an easy thing to shunt aside sometimes.
Definitely. Okay, I had a couple questions for you, just as I'm in a Women in Leadership certificate program here at Franklin Pierce, and I was wondering, since you're an alum, did you have a program like that when you were going here or in grad school? I know you said that you went to one later on, but...
Yeah, I don't recall any specific Women in Leadership program while I was here at Pierce. Certainly, I think that I was able to avail myself of a number of opportunities to find informal mentoring relationships across the campus. I think a great example of that would be Dr. Zertsevi and her film class. I took an opportunity to meet with her outside of the class to talk about my ambitions to study film, to get advice from her. I did that with a number of professors where I knew they've got information, they can share knowledge, they can give me some guidance on what I should be doing here. But there was nothing really that formal. So I'm really pleased to hear that there's a certificate program now, because I think that's really needed.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And what advice would you give, like your biggest advice for someone wanting to seek out a leadership position, especially a woman?
I think it's about being fearless, and I think it's also about, it's not about perfection or demonstrating that you've got the entire resume to be able to do something. I think that you can demonstrate through action. And if there's another thing that I've learned in kind of analyzing and talking with other women about why women sort of hit a ceiling at a certain point, and this is a truth borne out by a lot of research, women will typically not apply for a position or consider it unless they think, I can do it. I've got all the skills. I've demonstrated that I can do this. I'm ready to go. More often than not, men will look at a position and decide, yeah, that's mine. I can do it, and they might have half the skill set that's listed. Women are not perfectionists, but I think wait until it's almost too late to look at a position that they're probably right for at that moment, but they think that they need more experience for. And I've definitely had conversations with women who have applied for positions that I've been familiar with, who have literally had that conversation with me. They've said, yeah, I saw that job, but I don't know if I'm ready for it yet, so I'm not going to apply. And there's no downside to pursuing the job. The worst is that you don't get the job. Yeah. But I think that for a lot of women, we kind of hold back until we've got the perfect set of requirements, and that is just not necessary. You can develop into it on the job.
Okay. All right, so now I kind of want to open the floor up for questions, if anyone has any.
Hi, Genevieve. Welcome
Hi.
Back.
Thank you.
My name's Donna Decker. I teach English at the Women's Studies program.
Oh, great.
So my question is, what have you seen, what's been your experience being a woman in leadership since the most recent presidential election?
That is a great question. You know, it's interesting because I've definitely had group conversations with fellow executives. It's a natural point of conversation. Not only where I work, I mean, and I certainly work in the entertainment industry, so there's like a whole layer of other things going on, as we know, with the Me Too movement. And I can't help but feel that I work in a little bit of a bubble in that I work for a network that has primarily female leadership, which is not typical. And I feel as though there's a lot of parity in terms of the people that I work with. Like it's a really great, diverse mix of people, and not every company has that. And I think since the most recent election, overall, women are realizing to a larger degree, perhaps, the disenfranchisement that might be out there. And so, for lack of a better description, it's a hot topic and people are discussing it, which I think is great, because I think that if there's one thing that struck me about the most recent election and the conversations that I had, and this was a really interesting observation one of my colleagues made, who was a senior vice president. She said, if nothing else, I think this is a wake-up call that if women thought we were at a certain point in terms of rights, in terms of equal pay, many other topics, many other issues, this should be the wake-up call that we're not there yet. And I think that especially my perception is that women who are younger than me, I think it's kind of easy to take for granted where you get at a certain point. And it's just, that's not the reality. And so I think if anything, if this really helped put back on the radar, we've still got things to address. That's really important. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Juice Ringwald. I'm an English major here as well.
Hi. Great.
My question for you is, what originally drew you to Franklin Pierce University? Was there something about this school in particular that really drew you here?
Yeah, the reason that I chose Franklin Pierce, a couple of different reasons. One was the size of the community and how closely knit the community was. I like the fact that it really seemed as though my first impression was that there weren't really boundaries between faculty and students and staff, that it was all one community together. And I like the idea of being in this small community for several years and being able to focus on what I wanted to study. And I also like the fact that I could explore a range of things right away when I got to the school. When I was a freshman, I produced a TV show, I wrote the script, figured out pretty quickly that's a lot of work. I don't want to do that, but I had a fun time doing it. I also had a radio show. I joined a number of clubs. I got heavily involved in many things. Some things fell by the wayside, other things I kept on doing. I studied abroad for a semester, which was definitely life-changing. That was a goal of mine when I got to Pierce. I got to realize that there are so many advantages to being in a small community for 4 years and really getting to know people at that level. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Verna DeLauer. I teach in the Environmental Studies Department. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about Turner Women.
Yeah, so Turner Woman is the name of a business resource group that is just for Turner Broadcasting employees. Turner Woman, our board is made up of approximately 12 to 15 executives across the company who are all female. The current head of Turner Woman internally is the woman who runs Turner Studios, which is our production end of Turner Broadcasting, and that's also in Atlanta. I've been on the board for a couple of years, and this past year I volunteered to be the co-chair of our Circle Mentoring Program. And Turner Woman is the biggest resource group internally at Turner. We do have other groups focused on Turner vets, veterans of armed forces. We've got lesbian and gay group. We've got Turner parents. We've got an African American BRG. So there are different segments across the company that come together to highlight different things. Turner Latina. Turner Women is the biggest, and we know that we can have a big impact on the company by developing programs like this. So the Circle Mentoring Program that we do is gathering groups of men and women who are led by a pair of executives, 2 vice presidents from across the company, to meet once a month to talk about whatever they want to discuss. And it all stays in the circle, we like to say. So the program has been around for about 8 or 9 years. Last year we had about 170 people registered for it. And this past year I took on co-chair responsibilities, and we just closed our registration for this year, and we had 370 people apply. And I think that we're all super excited about it. We were also blown away by the response because we didn't want the groups to be too big. But it's been really gratifying to see the fact that many people are getting even more invested in learning from each other and also looking for that opportunity. So that's a major part of what I do for Turner Women. Hi.
My name is Kendra Cyphers. I'm a graduate assistant here at Franklin Pierce, and I just wanted to know your experience here at Franklin Pierce. How did those skills kind of get you to where you are now? How did you get those leadership skills just being in everyday classes here?
That's a great question. I did have a few leadership opportunities while I was here at Pierce. Specifically, I was the president of the English Honor Society, Sigma Tau Delta, and I wasn't necessarily in leadership positions, but I really tried to create opportunities. For example, I wrote for the Pierce Arrow at one point. I tried to find opportunities to be a part of a group of people who are working together as a team, to collaborate with people in that way. That's probably the extent of it, I would say. And your other question was what kind of skills kind of informed what I do now, and we were just discussing prior to beginning the taping the fact that I think being an English major, having those critical thinking skills, analytical skills, communication skills, could not have been a better groundwork, could not have been a better foundation in terms of where I wanted to go with developing a career that I use that daily, all the time. It's a part of how I am able to function, and get the job done. Thank you.
I think my question is actually a sort of an affirmation, and maybe it's even a statement, but I was wondering about that very thing, so liberal arts skills, and what you've seen with people you've mentored. What I'm hearing from them, what I read and what I hear from people who are hiring young people who've just graduated is that they want them to be critical thinkers. They want them to be able to communicate in writing and in person. They want them to be able to follow directions. These are all things we work on in a fervent manner in our classes. But I just wondered if you could say something about that. They want them to read, write. I could go on, but you get my point.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because I've been in a hiring role for a number of years now, and I also have done informal mentoring for people working at Turner who are looking at other positions, who are looking for information and feedback on their resumes, and other things of that sort. And one thing that really strikes me is that the workforce coming in that I see is, I think, much more experienced in the way of internships and trying out a lot of different things even before they graduate from college. I was joking earlier today, I had lunch with the president, and I said, I have resumes that come in from someone who's 22 years old, and they've filled 2 pages with the experiences that they've had. I don't know what I was doing during college, but I didn't have any internships until after college. And that's definitely not the norm today. I think it's just a different ballgame, and I think it's better, actually. I think it's great that people are getting real-world experience, and I think that employers love to see that no matter what level you're coming in at. If you're entry level, you're only expected to have a certain amount of experience, but you're expected to be genuinely curious, enthusiastic, demonstrate that you've got a modicum of those skills. At a very basic level, something that I recommend to people who are applying for jobs, and this seems very basic, but I think it speaks volumes. In terms of communication, I am surprised at the lack of follow-up sometimes from candidates, and that definitely makes an impression. And I've had a lot of discussions with our HR group about this, and they say this is just a different way of doing things. This is the way that this new generation is coming in. If you get an email or a phone call following up from an interview, that's unusual. And I thought, that's not how I did it. In a way, there's no right or wrong answer there. There are different ways you can follow up. But I think what's important to realize is that as you put yourself out there, and this is a term that I've heard a lot at Turner over the years, and I'm sure is used elsewhere also, and you may have heard it, but personal branding. When you're putting yourself forth and you're demonstrating, I'm working at a certain level, and this is why you should take me on, and I have potential here, you should also think about all of those other things that come across when you do an interview and you put yourself forth. And a lot of people call that like your personal brand. What are people going to remember afterwards? How do you want to present yourself? And sometimes, for various reasons, I'm sure the perception doesn't come across as what people might intend.
My question for you is, what is the hardest part of your job?
What is the hardest part of my job? I think it is the daily, almost hourly reassessment that I constantly have to do of what do I need to get done today. I juggle a lot. I also delegate a lot more than I used to because I have to. There just aren't enough hours in the day. And I have to be very strategic and focused on, here are the things I need to get done today. Here's the list for tomorrow. I'm constantly reassessing and trying to figure out how do I juggle all these things and still have time for the other things I want to do. And it's not easy to take on certain level of responsibility in that way. There are many ways to cope with that, many ways to figure out how to work your way through it. That's what a lot of women in leadership classes that I've taken have often focused on. It's been about how do you make sure that you don't leave yourself off the list? How do you make sure that you're investing your time wisely, that you're efficient and smart about it, and give people what they need? And that's probably the biggest challenge, I would say.
Hi, I'm Callie. I work and study in the bio department. I was wondering, you're obviously in a great leadership role now. Was that always the goal? And if not, how did your path change to bring you to this leadership role?
That's a great question. When I started working at Turner Classic Movies, I saw immediate examples of people who had kind of worked their way up the ladder. And also, I had 2 jobs behind me at that point and had kept in touch with and had looked at other friends' careers kind of blossom and change as they went. And as I started to develop into more of a leadership role, I would say that was my goal, but I didn't know exactly where that would lead. I didn't know if it would be, I will get to sit here and have more control over the projects I work on and be able to be more strategic and directive about it rather than just executing. But it was very clear at my company that if I would continue to be promoted and do things, that there would also be a certain expectation. You'll be managing people, and you'll be determining this, and you'll be contributing to this. And that's not an easy journey to make. It's tough because when you're entry level at lots of positions, your job is fairly straightforward. You have assignments, you're completing things, you might work with a team. And as you start to become someone who's in a leadership role, then you have to think more strategically. You can't get in the weeds. You have to be okay with the fact that if you're delegating, it may not get done exactly as you want or the way you think it should be done, but you have to be okay with that. And so the lens changes as you take on more responsibility. And it's not always easy to let go, but at some point you have to, or you're never going to continue to develop. And that's not easy to do. Thanks.
Hi, Genevieve. My name is Tyler. I'm a sophomore here, and I do a lot in my major is sports media, and I find myself juggling a lot of things here. You, in your time here, you seem to have had a similar experience trying to get yourself into all these different avenues. What would your advice be to any college student on trying to take advantage of the extracurricular opportunities ahead of them and how to manage all that along with classes?
I would say certainly I looked on college as a time where even though I was busy and I had certain things that were non-negotiable, clearly you're going to go to classes, you've got other things you need to accomplish to get your degree done. I really wanted to take advantage of the fact that I knew I'd have extra time to try out other things. And this has kind of continued even past when I left college. I tried out certain things as a freelancer, for example, to find out, do I want to do that or not? I just can't tell until I go and do it. And so I also knew, and I think everyone realizes this in college pretty quickly, that at some point you're going to be working full time. You won't have the time to devote to the other things that you've been able to do before. And I really took it to heart that, at least for that 4-year span, that I would have the ability to spend more time reading than I would down the road, that I would have the ability to pursue areas of interest that maybe I hadn't gotten to, because I knew it would be more difficult later once I was out in the work world, basically. So it's hard because you've always got to prioritize, but I think there are ways to kind of juggle it and try to take advantage of the time.
How you doing? My name is Taji. I'm a senior here at Franklin Pierce. Since working at Turner Classic Movies, what has been your favorite memory so far since working there?
I think my favorite moment so far at Turner Classic Movies, and I am very spoiled to have a lot to choose from because I have just met so many amazing people along the way. We produced our first film festival back in 2010, and it was almost 2 years in the making. I worked probably 70-hour weeks at one point just to get it done. I was just focused. I was working weekends. I was doing everything because I knew that a lot was on the line, and I knew if we could succeed that we'd get to do it again, which was really important to me. And yet we hadn't done it before. We were counting on people showing up and attending this festival we'd never done. We were selling something that hadn't even existed. And we definitely had faith in, if you build it, they will come. But that first film festival was absolute magic because so many things could have gone wrong that didn't at the end of the day. And watching everything on spool after 2 years of planning was incredible. I met so many wonderful people that flew in from all 50 states to attend this, like, on faith that we would present something they'd want to see. And on the closing night of the festival, our host, Robert Osborne, at the time, he gestured to me from across the room at the closing night party, and he'd been talking with someone, and I could tell he was like, come over here. So I walk over to him, and he said to the gentleman next to him, he said, "Tell her what you just told me." And this guy turns to me and he said, I have been really, in depression. I've had so many problems in recent years. TCM is like the shining light for me. And he said, I cannot tell you how much this festival means to me. This has made me so happy. And I was really, despondent. And this has turned it around. Like, I'm feeling great. And I didn't even know how to respond. I'm like, that's great. I was like, wow, like it was this crazy moment. And then the next person that walks up asks Robert for his autograph. And then he asked me for my autograph, and I was like, I don't even know what's happening at this, like, what just happened? And it was such a validation of, I loved putting this together. I loved working on it. I poured myself into it. And it was so gratifying to hear from other people, this was fantastic. I loved it. I'll be back next year. I had a great time. And not every job do you get that kind of feedback. You know, I mean, a lot of people work in jobs where you might hear from your colleagues, your boss might recognize your work, but these are complete strangers walking up to me and saying, like, you made a difference. This is really important to me. And that's incredible. Like, not everyone gets that kind of job satisfaction. So I'd say maybe that was my favorite moment so far. It was great.
On that note, I actually wanted to take it to the complete opposite. How do you deal with failure or even just getting through slumps where maybe passion isn't quite enough to pull you through your job? Because obviously you want to keep that job. You're doing it for a reason.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've definitely had periods, especially in my career at Turner, where I thought, man, like my job is changing. Is this really what I want to do? Or I've you know, certainly I've had failures. I've had things where I thought later, wow, I handled that so badly. You know, it's so easy to beat yourself up after that, and recognizing that is important. That you are going to go through a moment where you think, God, that was just so dumb. Why did I do it that way? And the best you can do is learn from it, acknowledge it, and try to make it right. But also, you know, I have to say it's great, and I've been fortunate in this to work in an environment where when I failed, I know that like a certain thing is on the line, but you know, it's pretty rare that people around me get fired for failure, and we're encouraged to try things. And it's a bit like walking a tightrope. It's hard to get that comfort level because certainly most people in their jobs, you want to excel, you want to do things right, you want to do things great, and that just doesn't happen all the time. And it's helpful to know when something's failed, you can look back and find other examples, and you think, I got through that before. Now I'm at this point, and I'll be back here again, you know, at another juncture where it's going to feel better. And a lot of that just comes with experience and just getting through, you know, like having that happen. And sometimes it's not easy to remember that, but I think it's important to remember, you know, I failed in the past, and you know what, I came out of it. It's fine. And just kind of talking yourself through it really helps.
How you doing? My name is Falu. I was wondering, for anybody that's out there trying to like follow your path and like want to accomplish the things you accomplish, what's like one or two advice you would give them? You know?
I would say when I decided that I was going to pursue film as a career, but it was pretty murky to me what the path would be. I thought, okay, I'm just going to figure out like what the next step is. It was definitely my passion. I remember my senior year at Pierce sitting here and thinking, you know, man, I'm going to be working 40 or 50 hours a week somewhere. What do I not get bored by? You know, like I really want a job where I'm not bored, and I can't even, you know, it was hard for me to imagine, like, how do I make this transition into working full time? Like, what does that even look like? And I really thought hard about, like, well, what do I not get tired of? And the thing that kept on coming up to me was that I could talk about movies all day long. I could watch movies all day long. I loved learning more and more about it. And that had been a passion for me for some time. But for a long time, I thought, well, it's kind of a hobby. It's not something that's a job. And I think for a lot of people, and there are many ways you can follow a passion. It can take all forms. If you can stay focused on that, I feel as though what I've received in return is that when I express that enthusiasm and I talk with people about the genuine passion that I have for the topic, that comes through, and it's very authentic and it's very sincere, and somehow you're going to find someone who's going to respond to that and say, I can tell that this is really important to you, and you will work all day long on this, so you should try this, or let me connect you with that person. It's not a straight path. But I think if you're genuine about this is what I really want to do, people enjoy hearing that, and they take it at face value.
Just one more, for me at least. For those college students, because I know there's a lot of them out there that don't really know what they want to do after their time is up here.
Right.
I'm probably one of them. So what kind of advice would you give to those students as they kind of navigate those murky waters, as you said?
I think that I think most college students, it's a time of exploration, kind of figuring out what works. When I first entered college, I thought I was going to become an archaeologist. That was actually my first goal. Because for years I was obsessed by history. Um, I'm not going to lie, I was 10 years old when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out. I was obsessed with it, and I just thought, that is what I want to do. This is great. And I pursued that initially, but then I quickly figured out, as a lot of people get in archaeology do, like it's not only not glamorous or exciting most of the time, it's minutely digging, and it's there's so much minutia, there's so much dedication and patience required, and I thought, okay, I'm not quite sure that's the path I want to go down. And I know a lot of people who have started out in one place, and then 5 or 6 years later they wind up in another. So there's no straight path, like there's kind of no right answer. But even when I graduated as a senior and I knew I was going to grad school, I still didn't know exactly what I was going to do. But I thought, well, I'll figure something out. And when I was in grad school, and this happens with a lot of people, their senior year of college, you start to explore, okay, I know that I could do like maybe A, B, or C. I better look into these things, and the path just starts to kind of unfurl from there in terms of the connection points you make and who you speak with. I now certainly know in hindsight that there's no like magic ladder. There's no like one call you make and then you can finally get on where you want to go. It's just, for a lot of professions, it's not like that. So it's just kind of something meandering that you kind of have to figure out.
So one last question. What would you give the advice to someone, a young woman and maybe who is less confident in her classes and maybe wants to step up and be in a leadership role? How would you go about giving her some advice?
I think that for women kind of at the beginning of the path of considering what they might want to develop into and how they can become a leader, there are a myriad of things that kind of make up that skill set and how you can kind of develop into that role. When I think about who I was as a senior in college, I was someone who was comfortable leading the Honor Society. I contributed to various teams, but I also was more of a follower, and I think it wasn't just lack of confidence. I think part of it was, well, I don't really know if I know what I'm talking about there, so I'd rather support the mission, but not set it, so to speak, and not be a leader in that way. And I also was completely not comfortable with public speaking. And now I look at what I do for my job or doing something like this, and I'm still kind of amazed that I'm able to do it, because I was painfully shy. And it really just took practice and the opportunity to be able to address people and have those conversations. And so after years of doing film festivals, I can tell you I have absolutely no problem getting up in front of a theater of 1,000 people and saying remarks. But that was not an overnight thing. and there's still, in that way, in terms of developing skills, there's always more that you can do. But I think that a lot of it is just time and practice in terms of building those skills and finding those opportunities to step up and be someone who kind of leads the charge.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Tuesday's Briefing. And a warm thank you to our guests, hosts, and studio audience for today's important conversation.
Thank you. You did a great job.